Who is the most underrated actor of all time?
It's Dolph Lundgren.
Correct. Why?
Well, because of his spiky hair, and
Yep.
his ice-cold demeanor, and his big muscles.
Absolutely.
I must break you. The guilty will be punished.
My name is Sergeant Andrew Scott.
Come on, guys, don't do this. If I don't get breakfast, I get real grumpy. I don't think you like me grumpy.
And you go in pieces, asshole.
Let's kick some ass.
Hello and welcome back to I Must Break This Podcast. This is the fan podcast celebrating the cinematic career of action legend Dolph Lundgren. And today, boy, do we have do we have some fun films to discuss. Today we are chatting another triple threat combo: Acceleration, Hard Night Falling, and The Tracker. This trio of films were all shot back-to-back in 2018 and released in 2019, with Giorgio Serafini at the helm of two and rising star Natalie Byrne taking on major roles in two of the films as well. Clearly, the production on all three films was interconnected, so we'll be tackling each of these films in this one conversation. Joining me to discuss these gems is Tom Jolliffe, screenwriter and content contributor for the website Flickering Myth. Tom, thank you so much for coming back, man.
Hi, Sean. Yeah, it's been quite a while, so it's good to be back.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about it the other day. I think the last time I had you on, I mean, I know it was The Minion that we discussed. So what was that? Was that 2018 or 2019? It was a few years ago, though, right?
Yeah, it kind of makes you think about how much he's done since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially as I'm kind of coming near the end of this particular journey, with his particular filmography. The number of episodes that I have left are limited. I guess if we really wanted to, Tom, I could have done one episode on Acceleration, one episode on Hard Night Falling, and one episode on The Tracker. However, I'm not a fan of punishment, and I I don't think you are either. So I really appreciate you coming back, man.
No, I'm quite happy to come back for a triple whammy. I don't mind.
Well, and I know that this wasn't the easiest task for you, so thank you, because usually the guests who come on, we just look at one particular film, and I know when I broached the topic with you, I said, if I remember right, if we can kind of go back through the history or the genesis of this conversation, I know we originally talked about doing Acceleration and Hard Night Falling. And then I reached out to you again and I said, you know what? Like, The Tracker was done right around that same time with a lot of the same people, the same producers. I mean, it only makes sense to add that particular one on as well. You were extremely gracious in doing that. I also know that, I mean, you're a screenwriter yourself, so you have quite a bit of inside knowledge on the inner workings of the independent action genre, since, I mean, let's be honest, you've written many of these films yourself. So I was hoping, obviously, like I said, I appreciate you coming back to discuss three of these films, but I was hoping you might be able to lend a little bit of insight on the inner workings of these types of films.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had a little bit of experience, so yeah, I've got a few insights. It might just sort of explain a few things that maybe we, when as a viewer, maybe that you just look at and you think, well, there's no excuse for that. But maybe I might be able to pull out a few in favor of the filmmakers.
Well, and I don't want to. I mean, we should probably kind of front load this conversation. I've front loaded other conversations with this as well. I know that the movie business is extremely hard work. I know that putting together a movie is very time consuming, and even if it does not turn out the way I think fans, because I'm just a dude who's chatting about these movies and watching them, but I know that the people who are putting them together, I mean, getting a film off the ground, okay, from the initial script phase to filming, and then, finally out there on DVD or on the streaming screens or whatever it may be. I mean, that right there is an accomplishment, right? And that right there is a lot of hard work. But having said all of that, man, when we look at the final product with what we are given with these three particular films, it's like there's not a heck of a lot really to say, right?
Yeah, it's tough sometimes, and I think the people putting the money in, sometimes they're not necessarily creatively driven; they're more financially driven. So, if it turns out like, well, some of these films that they're not that concerned. And you kind of see that mentality with, I guess, like the Emmett Furler films and things like that, where it's just like this constant mechanism of churning things out.
Exactly. Yeah. Those particular films, they almost feel like an assembly line. You know what I mean? Like they are just made on an assembly line, and okay, this particular project, this particular production needs to finish shooting by Friday because on Sunday we are using the same exact set for our next piece of crap. I mean, you know what I mean? And I'd hate to think that these particular films were kind of going along with the same MO, if you will, but I mean, I don't know, man. It seems these films are all very similar in a lot of respects.
Yeah, they are really. It's difficult because the way streaming has worked out is it's turned a lot of things into, people call it all content now, and it almost belittles the whole kind of the artistic side of filmmaking, just to call things content. And this it goes right up to sort of Disney level and things like that. But, at this level, you want a piece of content to put out on streaming. The kind of returns you can get on streaming are a lot less than what it was 10, 20 years ago on DVD. Even then, a lot less than it was on VHS. So it's difficult. You're making these things, you've got to make them cheap to make a sort of tidy return on it. And it's all, with the action genre in particular, you have to have kind of name talent on board. So, for a lot of these films, if you get sort of a cast together like you've got in Acceleration, for example, you're probably paying 80% of your budget out for the cast alone, which doesn't leave a lot left to put on screen.
Oh, we said that exact same point when we were discussing The Best Man, which is another, which is one of Mr. Lundgren's more recent efforts. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it really does become simple mathematics at a certain point. Okay, because if your budget it only allows for $2 to $3 million, okay, and then your stars, okay, you're bringing on your name cast or whatever. Well, their salaries and all of their demands and everything that they require to star in your production, well, that takes up 80% of your budget. Well, then you're really not left with much, and you still have to figure out sets. You still have to figure out cameras. I mean, and it's the little things that I don't think the regular schlubs like me really realize. But yeah, you also have to figure out, okay, catering and hotels and Airbnbs for your various cast members and everything like that. I mean, so it's like if your stars are getting, pretty much all of the budget, then you really don't have much to work with at a certain point.
Exactly. I mean, I'm producing a film right now myself, and just the amount of costs that keep escalating, and they're always from unexpected places. I mean, we've got a sequence that's going to be 20 seconds on screen, and we need a police presence there, but then the police insist on having 2 people there instead of 1, which means it's double the price. And it's like another thing that you're adding on unexpectedly to the budget. And again, with our film, a big chunk has gone towards our kind of name talent in it. So it's really difficult. And again, time, the luxury of time to shoot something in, like they used to call it really short time periods to shoot films in sort of 30 days, like, Dolph was doing like 25 years ago. Obviously nowadays it's half that, sometimes even less. So yeah, time costs money, but there's not really a lot of money to give you that time.
Oh, and you can tell. I mean, if you look at a film like Hard Night Falling, I'd be willing to bet with Hard Night Falling he had maybe 5 days on. Acceleration, I'd be willing to bet was probably even less than that. And then The Tracker, I don't know, man. The Tracker had to be about maybe 10 days. I mean, because I remember when all these films came out, and I should probably say, if you go back through the archives of this particular show, when The Tracker was approaching release, I had the pleasure of speaking with Giorgio Serafini. And then when Acceleration was approaching release, I had the pleasure of speaking with the star and the producer, Natalie Byrne, and then one of the directors, Daniel Zarilli. And I remember when I spoke with them, I mean, they were all really proud. I mean, obviously these final products are their babies, right? These are the projects that they worked on for, the stars only worked on for a few days, but I mean, they spent time, in the editing room and whatnot. So, I mean, I think in the end, they're about as proud as they can be of the final product. So bless them for trying to find diamonds in the rough. But man, you watch these films and it's like, really, like at the end of the day, I don't know. I feel bad. Like I said, I don't want to mitigate their talents, and I don't want to completely become a low-rent comedian trashing these films. But it's one of those things where it's like, were they really happy? Like at the end of the day, when they were looking at the dailies and the final product, was Zarilli and Natalie Byrne and Giorgio Serafini? Well, in the case of Hard Night Falling, that's Giorgio Bruno, but we're going to talk about that. We can put that in quotes. But I mean, it's like at the end of the day, were they happy with the final product, or were they more happy with the financial returns that they were getting from like foreign sales? You know what I mean? Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it can be difficult to you can't really be too blunt about your own films, really, even if there's certain things that you don't particularly like or you weren't happy with how things turned out. You sort of have to I guess you've got to be careful what you say, to maintain relationships, but also, at the same time, you want to promote the film and, give a good account of it and at least put on the impression that you were pleased with it. But, I know that from a lot of filmmakers, they get frustrated with certain things. Again, when it comes to the people sort of investing the money into it, they're not that bothered as long as they get a product to put out that they know that they can sell, internationally and make a lot of money in the US. It's just difficult. I think, for something like, if you look at Acceleration, say, that's been made, put out in the kind of timescales they have, it's almost a miracle. And, for every sort of film that gets put out, there might have been 4 or 5 other scripts that kind of went through the whole process of looking for investors, looking for funding, things falling through at the last minute. I mean, we've seen it over the years, all these unfinished projects or, cancelled projects that Dolph's been attached to. So, we know how the business works out from that point of view. There's been a lot of films that kind of nearly happened but didn't quite. And I've had a few myself, but yeah, so every kind of film is almost a miracle that it's put out there, but sometimes it's almost like you're just pumping it out the best you can under the circumstances. And again, a lot of these, there won't often be a chance for directors or producers to have the final cut or, have a real say in how the film is promoted or put out.
Well, and I mean, everything you said is exactly correct. I mean, and the other thing too is, and I've come back to this on previous episodes, but I'll just reiterate it again. I mean, when you look at a presence like Dolph Lundgren, he is such a formidable force in front of the camera, and I guess you could say behind the camera as well, obviously. But you look at these films, and it's like, man, these were really the best opportunities that were coming his way. Huh? I mean, and it's really It's really unfortunate. It's really kind of sad because you look at some of the other projects, and it's not saying if you look at the things that Mel Gibson is doing nowadays, it's like, man, okay, Mel Gibson is an actor who obviously deserves better as well. You know what I mean? But it's like, at least in my opinion, of course, I know some would disagree with that, but it's like, wow, that's really, considering his talent and considering what he can bring and what we've seen him do. Okay. Back in 2018 and 2019, these were really the best projects that came his way, huh? Okay.
Well, I think it might be a case of they were maybe the most financially enticing projects. You know, I bet Dolph must get loads and loads of offers. There might be something that's a little bit different, a bit kind of quirky or out there. I mean, if you take something like Small Apartments, for example, he's working with quite a famous sort of art house director from Sweden, who's done sort of quirky films. You know, it's a bit interesting, a bit different to what he normally does, but, you know, financially he's going to be making a lot less than he would doing something like The Tracker. And you know, I would probably imagine that what he's earning on stuff like The Tracker and Acceleration and things like that are probably more than what he would earn on The Expendables 4 or Aquaman 2. So it's difficult. Maybe you're turning down the little indie quirky art house film to do a kind of action project because you're getting paid 3 or 4 times as much.
No, it's a great way of looking at it. Yeah. Well, I mean, in the end, and I want to, and I'm going to save it for the end if that's okay. But because I know that you've worked on quite a few different projects. I know that you actually have a few that are in the pipeline at the moment. We'll save that for the end because I'm really curious about some of those. But if we look at these 3 particular films, I mean, it's kind of funny. Granted, we are going to be discussing 3 films, but it should be a relatively short conversation. I remember before we got recording, you made the comment, "Oh yeah, this is going to be a breeze." Hard Night Falling, don't bother. Acceleration, don't bother. The Tracker, nope, don't bother with that one either. But you know, I'll let you pick. Okay, I know that these are real gems. Okay, to discuss, but I'll let you pick. Which one shall we chat about first? Do you want to do Hard Night Falling, The Tracker, or Acceleration?
Oh, shall we do Acceleration?
We'll do Acceleration. Okay, great. Okay. I have quite a few things to say about this one. Okay. In this film, Natalie Byrne takes the lead as Rona, a tough enforcer who does jobs for various mob organizations. But when her son is kidnapped by her employer, Vladek, played by Dolph Lundgren, her orders are clear. Take out Vladek's competition over the course of a single night or risk never seeing her son again.
So tell me, how's that reimbursement program coming along? Good?
I'm working on it.
In this business, there is no room for mistakes. Any wrong turn, and innocent people can pay the price. These streets and 5 tasks stand between me and seeing my son again.
Do the job, and you get your son back.
Tick tock.
Dominic. How you doing, buddy?
We're gonna play a game. So you and I, we're gonna do a little bang bang.
Get out of here, man. There's nothing here for you.
Word has it you're on a quest.
I'd rather not be.
Hey, your kid ain't here.
You know, quests can be life-changing.
This could be life-ending.
I need you to do me one favor.
Anything.
Yeah. Don't beg.
How do I know you haven't already killed him?
You don't.
See, now you got me curious.
This particular film is interesting. I mean, it's very clear that this is Natalie Byrne's film. Natalie Byrne, who is a rising star in the genre. I mean, when Acceleration had come around, it's not like she was really a rookie in the business. She had quite a few films under her belt, but with this particular film, yeah, not only is she the main star, she was also the executive producer on this one. I mean, yeah, she's the main character. She's in virtually every scene. This is her movie. This is kind of like her opportunity to show audiences and producers that, hey, not only can I lead a film, but I can also I know the right people to kind of assemble a film and get it together. I will say, after watching this, I still don't know if really she's the best lead. I don't know if this film is really the best display of her acting talents. It's certainly a good display of her physicality, I will say. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Yeah. I mean, I like Natalie Burn. I think she's got a lot of potential. I would say that she's got one out at the moment called Till Death or Until Death, which I think, it's been getting reasonably solid reviews, and she's been getting quite good reviews from it. So I think that would probably be more of a good display of her talents, I think. But yeah, I think this one, in terms of, putting something together, it's a good way to do it if you want to launch yourself, where you take control really and then make the project happen. But I think, it's because of the tight constraints. I think this had like 3 weeks at the most, I would have thought, to shoot.
Oh, and you can tell. I mean, Danny Trejo who's in this film, one scene, he was clearly on set for a day. Rampage Jackson, who's also in the film, once again, a day. I think Chuck Liddell was on this set maybe about 2 days. So when you hear those kind of things, it's like, okay, I guess they're working with the best they possibly can. This particular film was directed by two individuals. It was directed by Michael Marino and Daniel Zarilli. I don't know if there was some things that went on behind the scenes for why there were two directors brought on board, but in any case, the best way I think to describe this film, it's interesting. The film is essentially a wannabe Fast and the Furious meets John Wick, only the car chase sequences, if you really want to call them that, are basically just shots of Natalie Burns' Maserati zipping around the streets. Okay, it's just her driving this particular car, and the camera is, filming it real fast, from various angles. And I guess that's supposed to be exciting. The other thing about this film that's interesting is I guess you could say it's kind of a perk. It's one of the things that kind of helps the film stand out a bit. But there's this over reliance on neon in the film, which is somewhat unique and stylized, I will say, considering that everything else about this film is cheap. I mean, that's my big thing that I'm going to come back to with Acceleration in particular. I think it's clearly the cheapest looking of all three films.
Yeah, I think in terms of like the locations that they used, it was, again, sometimes it can be difficult to get, really fancy locations, but it's they're so sort of nondescript and kind of, cheap looking. But, I did quite like the fact that they did something with all the neons and things like that and the lighting.
Yeah, the lighting, yeah.
Yeah, and the grade. But I think, that at least that showed some intent to kind of make it, pop visually. Yeah, I think, I said in my original review when I reviewed this on Flickering Myth that one thing it does lack is acceleration. Because, you would expect a lot more car chases and things like that. But obviously, this is where you kind of dig yourself into a hole doing a film like this, where you probably need an extra week or two to, put together car chases and, a lot more money as well. So, yeah, it's not really billed in the way it should be, really, which is difficult for the film and putting it out there. But, in terms of like fitting names in a day at a time, it's difficult because the only way you can really do it is it's always going to feel a little bit awkward, like they've been shoehorned in. And I think that's the case here. But, that's the way that pretty much everyone is doing it. That you might suddenly hear maybe 3 or 4 weeks before shooting, or even in less time, that, oh, Danny Trejo's available, let's quickly write a scene for him, put him in, and then you're kind of like adding bits into your script. Because I've had to do this before myself, ironically, for Danny Trejo. So
okay.
you're adding things in that, you're adding them into a script that works, going from A to B. So anything you add in from then on is effectively superfluous, unless you do like a major sort of rewrite. But again, if time's short, then you can't really do that. So yeah, it's tough. I think one of my biggest issues with this one is that Dolph seems a little bit, his character, it seems a bit awkward in terms of the film. I think you've got Sean Patrick Flannery, who I quite liked in this, because he's just kind of letting loose, and I quite like that in a villain. Dolph is this kind of character where you're not really ever sure of his motives. He's meant to be kind of a bad guy, but because it's Dolph, they have to kind of play up to his heroic side a little bit as well. So morally, he's kind of like on this tightrope where he keeps flipping one side and then the other. And I think it feels a bit awkward. And then you add to the fact that he's only ever sort of seen in one room or, a couple of rooms. And it just, it feels a bit like he's a bit needless in the film, but obviously, he's the big name.
Well, I mean, yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, that was going to be my next point was, Dolph's character is Vladek. Most of his scenes are just of him sitting behind a computer monitor watching all of the action unfold. That's the other thing that's kind of interesting to me, too, is we're expected to believe that, Rona, that's Natalie Burns' character, she has just one night to complete 5 tasks. And it's like, we've seen films before that take place over the course of a single evening or a day for that matter. Okay, fine. But it's one of those things where it's like 2:30, 3 in the morning, and apparently the criminal underworld is wide awake at these hours. I mean, when we see Danny Trejo, he's eating like a full-on steak dinner. And it's like at 3 in the morning? Okay. You know what I mean? It's, But yeah, that's Dolph's role. I mean, all of his scenes, I'd say, what would you say Dolph is in this film? Maybe 12 minutes collectively? I mean, if you're going to put all of his scenes together, maybe 15, but I'd say about 85% of those scenes are him just sitting behind a computer monitor, watching, everything unfold. How he has camera access to everything that's going on is questionable, but that's fine. He does get an action sequence at the end that involves a shootout, and then he later on gets a fist fight with Chuck Liddell. So I guess those are, pretty welcome. But I mean, in the end, if we're talking about the cheapness of this film, the scene that I just went bonkers laughing about was, one of Rona's tasks is to blow up a building that belongs to Vladek's competitor, Kane. Okay, so that's Sean Patrick Flannery's character. He plays the rival Kane. Okay, so Rona is to blow up this building. Only the explosion, and I put explosion in quotes, the explosion is seen via a computer monitor and then in Rona's reflection. And so it's, wow, clearly this production did not have the funds to spring for any kind of pyrotechnics or any fake pyrotechnics. We see it in a reflection. Okay, that is what we're working with, and that's one of the best ways to kind of describe the film.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's tough when you've kind of got to cut corners, and it's like you're always taught sort of in writing, never to try and take the cheap way out, but sometimes that's all the choice you have. Yeah.
I mean, I will say the fight scenes, mainly on Natalie Burns' behalf, are quite good. I mean, Dolph's fight scene is okay. Oddly enough, I remember back in the show when I had the pleasure of speaking with Tony Messenger, that's Dolph's go-to stunt double. He was gearing up, so it was funny because right when I had the conversation with him, he was getting ready to leave to go practice rehearsals for the fight scenes in this particular film. But I think in the end, the real showcase, if you want to call it that, is on Natalie Burns' behalf. I mean, you can tell that she is very invested, and her fight scenes, the few that she gets are, I will say, they're quite good considering the scope of the film, and I use that term loosely. But I mean, I will say that that's one of the perks.
Yeah, I felt the same. Yeah, I think you can see maybe in a few of them where maybe one might have had more time than the other, but I think there's some nice camera work in there and choreography, and in terms of what she does physically as well, it's pretty impressive. I would have, if they'd have made this a little bit more, I guess, sort of Atomic Blonde and had more fist fights and less kind of driving around, it might have been a bit more interesting, had a bit of more pace about it, I think. But I think, there's a bit of a lack of urgency in the film, and I think a lot of that is where they've spread Dov quite thin, and you've got to keep cutting back to him in a room or kind of in the kids' room in the film as well. And then there's quite a forced kind of plot twist as well, but let's not spoil that.
Yeah, we're going to get to the plot twist because that completely negates everything in the film. But yeah, I mean, you already mentioned the cast. Let's just run down the cast. What's interesting about the lineup of stars that this film has employed is it really becomes a bunch of who's, and they all just kind of float into the film and then leave. And then we never see him again. I will say, we talked about Natalie Burns, her fight scenes being a bright spot, but Sean Patrick Flanery, what's interesting about this film is if you go online, you read any review for this film, they all seem to call out Sean Patrick Flanery. And I think it's for good reason. I never thought that I would say, but he's I don't know, would you say Sean Patrick Flanery is probably the best thing about this film? He plays the villain Kane. He's the main villain. Interestingly, it's not a coincidence, but he also carries a cane around for reasons that are never explained. But you can tell that he's having fun in this role, even if he's using a very cheap and cheesy New York gangster accent. You can tell. I mean, he gets these monologues in the film that are clearly inspired by Quentin Tarantino. There's no way around it. I mean, it's clearly Tarantino inspired, but I mean, you can tell he's having fun, and it's kind of interesting the things that he's doing in the film. It's kind of like, I never thought Sean Patrick Flanery would be such a welcome presence of all people in a film.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he was probably the highlight for me as well. I think it was good to see, a villain that kind of where someone's really kind of dialing it up a bit and just making things a bit more interesting, because obviously Natalie Burn in the film, it's one of those where, obviously she's got these tasks to complete, but she's going to these kind of nondescript places and not particularly doing a lot in these places at times, besides the occasional fight or whatever. So, he makes something interesting happen on screen, but I think, obviously once he goes off it, everything kind of lowers again and it falls a bit flat.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at some of the other stars, I mean, that's an excellent segue once again, because, okay, so we already mentioned it, but Danny Trejo, he shows up in one scene, again, sitting at a table in with what I'm assuming like a fancy dinner, again, at 2:33 in the morning. He's also in this room that's overly lit with neon once again, which is interesting, but he shows up as another fellow gangster who is on board with Kane being taken out. He's apparently on Vladek's side, only in that one scene, and then we never see him again. And it's the same thing with Rampage Jackson. He's in one scene. His scene is basically there to show the way for. He pretty much points the way for Rona's next assignment. Okay, that she's to go on. The casting for me that really scratched my head was Sally Kirkland. Okay, Sally Kirkland shows up. Now, okay, she's gotten up there in age, so God bless her for still working. But her role in this film is literally just a waitress at a coffee shop who serves Rona coffee and then gives Kane a couple slices of pie. So it's kind of like, man, Sally, like you really wanted to show up for this in the role of a waitress?
Yeah, well, I mean, she's good friends with Daniel Zarilli, so I'm thinking she probably just said, or he probably asked her as a favor, or she said, have you got anything for me? And yeah, it's one of those. I think Daniel's got quite a big contacts book, so in the case of a lot of these roles, it might be a case of, could you just jump on this for half a day or a few hours in Sally Kirkland's case. It does add star value, but again, it's not entirely necessary all the time.
Well, it kind of reminded me of that scene in Ed Wood, okay, where where Ed Wood's wife at the time, I think it was Dolores Fuller, if I'm not mistaken, in the scene, she was played by Sarah Jessica Parker. But Ed Wood was like, "Well, here I'm giving the main role to this one gal, but there's a one line scene with the file clerk that you can have." And she was like, "What? Like that's the best you have for me is the file clerk?" And that's exactly what Sally Kirkland does in this film. Yeah, I mean, if we get to the end real quick, I mean, there's like you said, a completely ridiculous twist at the end. Okay, where it is revealed that so this is spoiler territory, Tom. I hope we're okay going into spoiler territory. Completely ridiculous twist where it is revealed that Vladek is actually the father of Rona's son. Okay, so by providing that particular twist, it really kind of negates any stakes or threat in the first place, because you know that Rona knew that Vladek was not going to kill his son. You know what I mean? Like Rona had to know that, okay, yeah, he's kidnapped, and I put, once again, that term in quotes, okay, he's kidnapped our son, but he's not going to harm him in any way. So it's kind of like, well, then why is Rona in this on this urgent quest to complete the 5 tasks if they're going to throw in that particular twist?
Yeah, I think it's just one of these awkward things. I think sometimes, if Dolph's going to play an outright villain, he tends to do it when he's opposite someone of kind of note, I guess. If he's opposite a Van Damme or an Adkins or something like that, or, for a particular director. I think in other roles that he's got to still have some sort of sense of morality to it. I don't know whether this is from him in particular, where maybe he had notes on his character, or whether it's just that the distributors felt that he has to have some kind of redeeming factor. I remember watching a film with Steven Seagal, probably his last one actually, and you always have to have a very, very distinct kind of moral compass with Seagal. He's playing the villain in the film, and the whole film kind of builds up to a last kind of conflict with this hero chasing him. But because it's Steven Seagal, he kind of has to flip things around, and then he gets the moral superiority, and he beats the hero and sort of kills the hero with the film. Really kind of awkward. And it kind of just completely demolishes the film right at the end, because you're trying to play up to the heroic image that Seagal thinks he's got. I don't think it's that case with Dolph, really, because he's not got that same kind of ego. But yeah, it might be that distributors felt that, you can't have Dolph playing like a child kidnapper and, this kind of irredeemable villain. So they've kind of tacked this awkward thing on. And I know, I've had it myself with distributors getting ideas. I've been halfway through writing a film, and then, a distributor's got the idea to have a film set in Amityville so they can put Amityville in the title as clickbait. So, sometimes it's like, oh, okay, we'll do that then. But it's really awkward. You can kind of see it doesn't quite work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and especially when Dolph's character and Natalie Byrne decide to embrace for one last kiss. So so after that twist has been revealed, okay, they decide, all right, let's go into Kane's lair, his hideout, and have one final shootout to kind of end this entire thing. And then Natalie Byrne looks at him and she goes, "Can we just have one more kiss in case we don't make it out alive?" And he says, "Sure." And they embrace, and it's kind of like, okay, this is the dude that kidnapped your son. And it was really, I was at that point, I was just kind of rolling my eyes. It was like, really? So, yeah. Anything before we wrap that one up? 'Cause I don't think there's anything more to really say about it. Anything else that you want to say about Acceleration before we move on to the next gem in this unholy trio?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I didn't mind this one. I think there are redeeming things in it. I think, as a proof of concept for Natalie Byrne's talents, it's probably worth seeing if you've seen her sort of since then and been, a bit of a fan. It's probably a good one to kind of maybe look back at. But yeah, I think, she's good. And then Sean Patrick Flannery is a highlight. it's not helped by the concept and a few sort of clumsy choices, really.
Well, while we're on the subject of Natalie Byrne, I think it makes sense to go to Hard Night Fallen next. Is that okay with you?
Yep, that works for me.
All right. So let's go to this one. This one might be probably the quickest conversation of the three. In this completely boring and mundane Die Hard ripoff, Dolph plays Michael Anderson, an Interpol agent who's not just on assignment in Italy, but also vacationing with his wife and daughter. Yet while at a fancy company dinner party, all 50 guests are taken hostage by a gang of thieves, intent on stealing $150 million in gold. Fortunately for Michael Anderson, his team of Interpol agents are still in Italy, lending him the help, and not just fending off these heavily armed thieves, but also rescuing his wife and daughter.
If I can have a moment of your attention.
A celebration.
I missed you so much.
Yeah, I missed you too. Turn deadly.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Got a hostage situation. Explosives all around. Sniper on the roof. You have to get the team to the villa ASAP.
What about your daughter?
I'm gonna have to get you safe first. I love you.
150 million reasons to kill.
Apparently, Rossini has a treasure buried underneath the villa.
Lock the perimeter.
One problem in their way.
Who is he? You're in no position to bargain, no matter how much you love your daughter.
Dolph Lundgren.
You're running out of time. Shouldn't underestimate this guy.
I'm a soldier, and it suits me to see him die. You enjoy killing.
Yeah.
Hard Night Falling.
Tom, I'm gonna need your help with this one. I really don't know what it was I just watched with this particular film. I was hoping you might help me make sense of it. My God, this film is completely inert. What do you think? What are your thoughts regarding Hard Night Falling?
I mean, it's the weakest of the three for me. I think also in terms of, Dolph has done quite a few kind of die-hard-ish sort of films over the years, and for me, it's by far the weakest. I've not seen Best Man yet, so I couldn't say how that compares. But this one is.
I'm sorry, but it's you don't have to rush out and rent that one anytime soon. So
no. It's difficult because obviously Dolph is kind of like the main lead in it, but again, his time I would imagine was limited. So when you've got that kind of Die Hard thing where let's go back to the original Die Hard where you're effectively following Bruce Willis through most of the film. When you're not following him, you're kind of like with the villains and his wife. So his wife is kind of like one of the points of view as well, because she's always there with the villains. You don't really get that kind of sense here. There's so many like long stretches where Dolph kind of disappears, or where they just kind of fill in the gap with him walking around these sort of dark tunnels, or out just outside the building. There's just like a real lack of action and tension, and it's they've gone for a Die Hard kind of thing, but they've got this one location, but they've not really known what to do with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so real quick, we should probably say, Natalie Byrne is in this film as well. When I spoke with Natalie Byrne, it sounds like she was hired to do this particular film with Lundgren. And then when Acceleration came around, that's how she had kind of built a relationship with him. So she was kind of able to kind of get him on board with Acceleration because they filmed this particular film first. But
that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, and so she's in the film. She plays Dolph's. She's a member of the Interpol team. She's one of his partners. Okay, but I mean, you said a lot there. I mean, the whole film to me. Okay, this is how I felt. But the whole film just feels like it was a complete tax write-off. I mean, that's really what it was. Okay, I think so. Supposedly, Giorgio Bruno is the credited director of this one, though rumor has it Giorgio Serafini, who Dolph has worked with a number of times. Serafini kind of helped ghost direct this one as well. But it almost feels, and I'd be willing to bet this is what happened, I honestly think that everybody on crew had access to this like Italian villa set. They were in Italy, okay? They had access to this giant hotel, and they just decided, you know what, let's squeeze out a movie real quick with this. And almost feels like maybe the script was being written on the fly. Only oddly enough, so much of the film takes place more in the woods than it does in the actual Italian villa. I mean, you would think if you're filming in Italy, then you're going to get some amazing Italian shots and everything like that. And they're going to do something, you know, pretty cool with that one set of this giant hotel. Only we get none of that. It's pretty much Dolph running through the woods in a film where his family is taken hostage inside a hotel building. You know what I mean? Yeah.
It's just really, really awkward. I guess part of that might have been location fees, might have been a consideration there. But I think, you know, you're right in terms of this feels like an afterthought almost. I mean, not that, a spoiler alert, that the tracker's going to be, you know, massively better, but that felt more like a kind of considered film, whereas this maybe, like Albert Pyun used to do this, where he'd be shooting kind of like a film in wherever it was. And he'd have the crew there, he'd have maybe some locations available nearby, and he'd kind of film a second film kind of consecutively or just after.
Yep. Uwe Boll did the exact same thing. But you know, Uwe Boll, you know, say what you will about him. I know that he does not have his fans, but he's done the exact same thing where he's like, oh, we have this set. This set is available for another week. Well, you know what? Let's pump out another film real quick. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a good way that, you know, you've got a crew. I don't know how much of the crew kind of crossed over, but, you know, you can kind of pump out two products instead of one. So, yeah, I guess there's some sense there. It probably makes more financial sense to do that way, two products, rather than putting extra time into the first one and making it better. From a fan's point of view, we would probably prefer that they used those 10 days and added it to the tracker. But, you know, from a distributor's point of view, they probably thought, oh, two films instead of one.
Well, I mean, and the film is, I mean, I already said it already, but I mean, the film, it's just inert. I mean, there are so many scenes that just go on and on and on. I mean, and to an extent, the tracker does something actually pretty similar, but there are scenes where people are just walking to answer phone calls or walking to like open a door. You know what I mean? Like, it's like the camera really decided. It almost feels like they're purposely just, you know, squeezing it in to kind of pad out to hit a 90-minute runtime, which, as is the film, really is barely able to do. But there's one scene that, I mean, you literally afterwards are like scratching your head like, wow, they decided to put that in. But there's one scene where it's Natalie Byrne and her partner pull up in their car waiting for Dolph's instructions and orders. Okay. And I don't know if you know the scene, but she gets out of the car, she puts her hands on her hips, she stands there, she's waiting, you know, waiting, I guess, for Dolph's orders or for him to meet them. And the scene then just cuts to the next scene. And so it's just really puzzling. It's like, wow, this scene was chosen with no dialogue or anything like that. You know what I mean?
It's odd. I think, you know, it could be just a case of padding out the time to hit like a 90-minute mark or close enough to it.
Yeah, I mean, and if we look at the leader of thieves, okay, so yeah, that's why they've stormed this hotel, okay. Hal, what's his name? Hal Yamanouchi, who I remember showing up in. What's interesting is the only film I saw him in was he was in the Wolverine, and so he played this just decrepit old man who shows up at the end of the Wolverine movie. But he is the leader of the thieves. I'm just going to say it, Tom. This guy, he's probably the worst choice for an intimidating foil against someone like Dolph Lundgren. Okay, he is just It's just this little guy. He looks way too old. He does get a hilarious scene where he has Dolph's wife hostage in a car, and he literally growls at her. Do you remember this scene? He literally like growls at her when he realizes that his plan isn't going his way. I mean, it's just, you know, again, kind of like what we said with Acceleration. God bless some of these actors for trying, but man, it's very clear that he was chosen because he was available. Again, I think that's the thing we're going to keep coming back to with this film is they had the set available for an extra week. They decided, you know what, let's make another movie. And hey, who do we have available? Who is nearby Italy at the moment that wouldn't mind coming by for 2 weeks so that we can shoot this thing and get it in the can?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. I did expect a lot more from him. And again, my only experience of seeing him before was in The Wolverine as well. But I do remember him being quite good in that. So I did expect a bit more of a kind of an imposing villain, or just to do something a bit more interesting with the character. Because I guess you don't necessarily have to be physically intimidating, but you can do something like Alan Rickman does, where you bring something different to it, or you bring a different kind of intimidation to it. But it didn't seem like he really brought anything to the character.
Well, I mean, Dolph does get. I mean, we should probably say that Dolph does get a fist fight with one of the henchmen, with one of the thieves. Really big dude. Okay, it takes place in a basement, but that fight scene really never snaps alive. I mean, the thing is, and it's one of the things I'm going to be saying about the tracker as well. I mean, but the film is just so dimly lit. I mean, like I said earlier, that a lot of it takes place in the woods, and then there's quite a few scenes that are in like this basement. So the coloring of the film is not particularly pretty or favorable at all. I mean, because like I said, it's just so dark, and I mean, and even that fight scene. I mean, man, it's interesting because I mean, Dolph is of course at an age now where maybe he cannot do what he once did. And so, but then again, if you have a director who's on set who knows how to film it, then they can still make it look good, okay? But in that particular fight scene, I mean, you can tell that that it's being directed by someone who's more interested in getting the scene completed by the end of the day, rather than putting together a really good fight scene. At least that's how it appears to me. Because in the scenes, I mean, Dolph, you can tell that he's like kind of reeling back to take his punches. You know what I mean? It feels very, very rehearsed. Like it was rehearsed maybe an hour beforehand, and then the camera started rolling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you look at Acceleration, for example, they probably had a better stunt team. And again, maybe it's a cost consideration with Hard Night Falling as well, that maybe they didn't, hire in quite as good a stunt team, or a team that will choreograph anything more intricate. I think obviously in hindsight, we might look at Dolph, and I mean, it's age as well, but, we know kind of in retrospect now that he had ankle problems probably around about that time, before his operation. And obviously we also know in retrospect that around about that time he would have been struggling with cancer as well. So
right, yeah,
there were kind of mitigating circumstances that would slow him down, obviously, in terms of fighting. But in terms of the choreography and how they've shot it, it's kind of like rushed, isn't it? So it's just do whatever you can. And, there's a few kind of Dolph go-tos that they can wheel out, which is like, block and then a right cross and a right cross, maybe a knee gut. There's a few kind of easy go-to staples that have been kind of recycled quite a lot. Yeah, it just, there's nothing really that intricate or exciting in the fights. And even then, they're too few and far between as well.
There is an explosion at the end, we should probably say, right? There is a great big explosion, but it's also a hilarious CGI explosion. So going back to Acceleration, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, what's better? A giant CGI explosion or an explosion that is shown in a character's reflection? I don't know. I guess I'd probably say a CGI one. I guess if I really had to pick
Yeah.
one or the other.
Yeah. I mean, I would have personally just, if you can't do a full-on explosion, I'd have just blown out some debris with an air cannon or something. But you know,
well, is there?
different.
I mean, I don't. I mean, gosh. I mean, I feel like we really just kind of glossed over this film, but I mean, there's not much for it. I mean, and that's kind of the point that I've come to with a lot of these particular films is it's kind of like, look, I don't think the actors were really that invested in the particular film, so I don't see why I, as a viewer, really need to spend a whole lot of time on it either. You know what I mean? It's kind of one of those things. But before we go to our last one, is there anything else that you want to add or say about Hard Night Falling?
Yeah, I think just as you say, there's nothing really that stands out as being too memorable. Besides it, you know, even it being quite a short runtime, it's quite a slog to get through. Even in some of like the middle range kind of die-hard films that Dolph's done, if you look at something like Detention, that still had these little moments in there where you thought, well, okay, that's quite a quirky idea, like you know, a chase inside a school hall with a guy on his kind of mobility scooter. They run a car through the hallway and crash through like a reception desk. You're talking a way bigger budget, obviously. Even looking back retrospectively, when, you know, you and I as fans would have looked at that film back in 20 years ago and thought, oh God, this is cheap. You know, 15 years later and he's making Hard Night Falling and it's like, oh boy. So it's difficult. There's not really any kind of moment where it stands out as being memorable or having a bit of imagination.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do have a fun fact for you. I think before we started talking, I said, dude, I found a really interesting deep cut for you. So, okay. So real quick, here you go, Tom. I don't know if you knew this or not, but in this particular film, Dolph, his name, like I said, is Michael Anderson. This is actually the second time that Dolph has played a character with the name Michael Anderson. Do you know the first time by chance?
I do. I watched it the other day, Cover Up.
Cover Up, yeah. Only in that film, it's Mike Anderson. But I just find it hilarious that he's once again played a character with the same name. I guarantee you that it's really only nerds like you and I that have made that connection. I'd be willing to bet that even Dolph doesn't remember.
I doubt he has any idea, or the writer. Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, let's go to our last one, our last of this three. And it's interesting. I think we're actually ending on about as positive a note as we can, I think, which is kind of ironic saying that. But, okay, so we're going to look next at The Tracker. In this film, Dolph stars as Aidan Hawkinson, a traveler who returns to the same Italian town 15 years after his wife and daughter were kidnapped and killed. When he gets wind that his case may be reopened, he teams up with a young Italian detective to uncover a conspiracy that goes even deeper than either man imagined.
The hunter kills its prey. The tracker understands it.
Hawkinson, we have your wife and daughter. $500,000 if you want to see them alive. Tonight at 11. No police.
Found them this morning.
Where are they?
I'm sorry.
It's Detective Laterza. I have information regarding your family.
No one can be trusted in this village. Corruption is everywhere.
It's kind of hard to live your life without knowing who killed your loved ones. What about the kidnappings?
To finance the drug smuggling, he alone covers half of Italy.
Revenge?
Justice, maybe.
Rated R.
All right, Tom, I'll go to you once again for first takes. What are your immediate impressions and thoughts regarding the Tracker?
I think I quite like these kind of thriller. Usually I do anyway. I quite like these sort of Euro thrillers, and I think this is the one of the three that probably had, in terms of the concept, the most potential. You've got a film set in Italy. You've got these great locations. And it could have been something really kind of interesting if they'd have managed to find a way to use Dolph better and implement some of the supporting characters, because I think there's this awkward thing of where they're trying to uncover these conspiracies and all this stuff, and they're kind of awkwardly finding things, and Dolph is quite passive throughout the film. I mean, he's meant to be the tracker, isn't he? Or, there's this big intro where he's remembering his father telling him about being a tracker and not a hunter. Dolph doesn't really do a lot of tracking in this, and he doesn't really do any hunting either. So, yeah, it's difficult. I think the concept was there. Occasionally, there's some nice locations that they use. But I do think one thing I will say about Dolph is there's a few sequences in it where he seems to be invested in that scene and invested in the character. He's got a couple of emotional scenes in it when I think he's definitely more interested in this than he was in Hard Night Falling, for example.
Yeah, well, we should probably say, actually, that my understanding is that, so Dolph was on set in Italy, doing both of these films. And again, it's my understanding that the producers, he kind of made a deal of sorts. So the reason why he did these particular films was with these Italian producers. It was pretty much a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type deal, where they were going to finance a pet project of his that he was going to direct called Malevolence. Are you familiar with this one?
I do, yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's pretty much the big reason, the big impetus for why Dolph did both of these films. Both Hard Night Falling and this one, The Tracker, because they both take place in Italy. He was working with these Italian producers. Unfortunately, it's one of those things. It's kind of the dirty. There's multiple dirty sides to Hollywood, I think we should say, but it's one of those one of the many unfortunate things. Is it's like, man, they got what they wanted out of this deal, but then things fell through and Dolph did not get what he wanted out of the deal, and so he did not get to make Malevolence, which is a very unfortunate, obviously. I remember when this one was in production, and I heard that it was once again going to be directed by Giorgio Serafini. Now, I will say, again, out of all the interviews, of all the people I've had the pleasure of speaking with, Giorgio Serafini was just so gracious with his time. He was just an extremely nice guy. However, if you look at the previous films that he had done with Dolph, I kind of call them the Serafini trifecta. Those films are not good. That's just saying it. So I remember when I heard that he was going to be doing this one as well, I was like, oh God, here we go again. I will say that this is the best of the four films, well, five if you want to call Hard Night Fallen, but of all the films that Serafini and Lundgren have worked on together, I will say that this is the best. How do I say this? This is the best one of the films. And I go back on that because the film is extremely boring. The film is colored very, very drab and bland. There's just really no colors to it. However, in the end, it does not look as cheap as those previous films. I feel like I will say about The Tracker in the end is it does, even though it is boring, and even though there are long stretches where like nothing is happening, it does resemble an actual movie for a change. And it is very clear, I will say with this one, regardless of how people feel about it or whatever, it is very clear that Giorgio Serafini was going for a 1970s European feel with this particular film. And I will say he succeeded, 100% on that level. Okay, I mean, this film, it does look and feel like one of those 70s Euro films. And so it works on that level. I think the film, it does a much better job than Hard Night Falling of working with the Italian locale as well. I mean, you can tell, I mean, this film is shot and set in Italy, and it does a great job with that as well. So those are some of the perks I'm going to be saying about the film. I think those are probably the only perks I'm going to say about it. But I will say it works there.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think, in terms of what it aspired to be, it's more my cup of tea really than just, maybe just pumping out another Die Hard film. Because I am a fan of those kind of Euro thrillers, but I think you've got to have a more kind of engaging plot line, and there's got to be more logic to how people kind of uncover things. It's just this awkward thing of balancing Dolph, and then you've got the young Italian cop. I can't remember his name, but I believe he's like quite a famous radio personality.
Marco Mazzoli is the actor's name. Yeah.
I think he did quite a good job in terms of his performance, but I don't think his character was necessarily that useful at times. I think he gets a lot of screen time, but he doesn't really do much to kind of uncover anything for long stretches of the film. So he's not really this kind of useful addition that helps Dolph kind of, get from A to B. But yeah, like I say, I think, Dolph is just too passive in the film. It's almost all these things kind of happen around him, and then at the end, they sort of happen upon what they're looking for. And it kind of, obviously with budget and everything, the action is lacking as well. So you don't really have that big kind of payoff at the end.
Right. Well, and that's some of the main, I mean, everything that you said are some of the big main problems that I have with this film is, okay, the film, it's so boring. I mean, I literally, I had to watch this, Tom, over the course of a couple days because I was kind of dozing out. I mean, you know what I mean? And in a film, I mean, that's the thing. Dolph has done this particular character archetype numerous times. Okay. The grieving father who's out for revenge. Okay. And he's done that. I mean, he's done that multiple times. We know that he can do it well. And so I remember when this was in production and I saw the trailer, I was like, okay, Dolph is going back to a well of that, playing a character that he's done before. Okay. Well, at least we know that he can do that. But the film is just, my God, it's just so boring. And like I said earlier, I mean, even the coloring of it, I mean, where Acceleration at least had some neon to kind of make you snap to attention. You know what I mean? This film, I mean, the colors of it are just, I mean, even Dolph's outfit is just this dark green, you know what I mean? And it's just really, really slow moving. You said it already, okay? You'd think for a film called The Tracker, okay, especially where at the very beginning, Dolph, he makes a comment, or excuse me, he does the narrating at the beginning, where he says, the hunter kills its prey, but a tracker understands it. So you're thinking, okay, Dolph is going to be on the tail of those who kidnapped his wife and kids, only he doesn't do any tracking. It's one of those things where in the first 10 minutes of the film, it's established, like I said, that he is the tracker, but then we see a scene where he goes to the police and they're saying, sorry, your wife and family were kidnapped and then killed. There's nothing we can do. And Dolph is just like, okay. And I guess he goes back to the States. He goes back home. And you're thinking like, wow, wouldn't he be like knocking on doors or going into backroom alleys or something like that to figure that out? And then the only reason his character returns to Italy is because the detective calls him up and tells him, hey, we have some more leads on your case. Come on out. And so he comes back out, but then he doesn't do any tracking. So it's like, why set that up that he is this badass tracker and hunter if they're not going to do literally anything with that at all?
Yeah, it's just another strange one, isn't it? That, even if you have a film with these kind of tight budgets, I look at something like The Defender where, that would have been a tight budget, although kind of gargantuan maybe compared to this one. But, they have this sense of pace where once they're in, they're being kind of stormed by the terrorists outside. I guess this is more of a relevant comparison to Hard Night Falling, but for this as well, there's an urgency there and there's a sense of pace where this one just has no urgency. Same with acceleration. There's no real acceleration in it, and in this, there's no tracking. So yeah, it's difficult. I think you need to these things need to be paced better, have a bit more urgency. I think the whole 15-year gap is really awkward to begin with. It should have just had a kind of Taken angle where it kind of, you've got this immediacy and he launches straight into kind of like a revenge mission.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and again, they don't really care if things are original or not, or so, why not just do another straight up revenge film?
Well, I mean, yeah, like you said, I mean, he's okay. We're establishing that Dolph's character, he's an expert in the field. He knows what he's doing. See, I guess what we're supposed to understand here, Tom, is that is that trackers, they understand their prey and they follow it. So when they do finally kill it, okay, because they've been tracking it, I guess, for so long that that gives them the upper hand, I guess. Okay, fine. And so that's exactly what Dolph does throughout this entire film, is he is just following those who supposedly know about his family, I guess. But it's really, I mean, in the end, it's really just various shots of him walking around in a wet slicker jacket with a sniper rifle, and he's hiding out in the woods. Okay, and that's pretty much it. He lets, I mean, when you and I, before we started recording, you said what's interesting is, okay, yeah, he's the tracker. It's his family that were kidnapped and murdered. Yet he's going to let this young detective do all the donkey work in uncovering the mystery. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, yeah, in the end, Dolph's character and his story almost become an afterthought, because he's really, in the end, he's really not the main character. The main character of this film is yeah, you already said it. The actor's name is Marco Mazzoli. He's playing a detective by the name of Antonio Graziani. He's this newly transplanted detective in Italy, I guess. And so that's pretty much the audience cipher, I think, to where, okay, this is that's the main character who's kind of uncovering the mystery behind this, when oddly enough, the guy whose family was kidnapped and murdered, who's gunning for revenge, we're going to put him on the sidelines, right? We're going to put him in the background and follow around this character that we don't care about in the least.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and you don't really establish much of a relationship between Dolph and the cop until way too sort of late on. So there's a lot, there's so much that we get introduced to this guy, the cop, played by Marco. So there's all this stuff that feels, very superfluous, like it's just filling time rather than taking the plot from A to B. And again, it's just another case of, it's an idea that's been too thinly thought out, and then there's sort of spreading it too thin. And they're just padding things out, really. So his character feels awkward, and it feels like an awkward sense of him carrying the weight that Dolph is not going to be able to carry, because obviously maybe he's there for, half the shoot or a third of the shoot. But I think they needed a more interesting way to have Dolph interact with this other character, have Dolph be more kind of proactive in the film. Because he's just too passive and he doesn't really do much tracking.
Yeah, I think we've come back to that point multiple times and said it is, for a film called The Tracker, there's not enough killing, there's not enough tracking, there's not. It's just, and I mean, and the other thing I will say about this film is, I mean, man, there is some absolutely terrible dialogue, okay, that is thrown in this film through exposition. So basically, if we go back a bit, so Marco Mazzoli's character, he and his pregnant wife, okay, they have just moved to Italy for a 2-year stint. And we find this out through a car conversation between Marco, or excuse me, the actor, between Marco's character and his wife, okay, as they're moving. And so we get just some awful dialogue that is really unnatural sounding and almost excruciating because, like I said, she's pregnant with twins, and we find that out again through some dialogue. It doesn't sound natural. I mean, I think even one of the lines he says is, hey, honey, how do you feel about moving to Italy for 2 years with a detective? I mean, he literally says that, and it's like, what? Like,
yeah, it's a weird one because I mean, I don't know the creative reasoning behind that, but you know, I know that sometimes I've had from distributors that they'll read through a script or something, and then they'll request things to be spelled out for the audience because they don't have enough trust in the audience might pick something up. So rather than just show a woman maybe sat there holding what's clearly a pregnant tummy, they have to have her sort of, you know, state out loud, "I'm pregnant." You know,
good to know. I couldn't tell with the prosthetic tummy.
You know, it's like with most screenwriting guys, they say that you should show and not tell, but sometimes, you know, distributors or whoever it might be might decide, well, is this clear enough? Are they going to know? Because they're almost willing their audience to spend half the movie or even 3/4 of the movie looking at their phone rather than concentrating. So, yeah, maybe they feel the need to sort of add lines of dialogue in that are almost like commentary, really.
Yeah. Well, and the rest of the film is, I mean, kind of like what we said with Hard Night Falling, the rest of the film is just a ton of pointless shots of people walking to cars, getting into cars, making phone calls, answering phone calls. I mean, literally all of those scenes take up valuable screen time of this film. And again, like I said earlier, considering that it's Dolph's character who's at the center of this entire thing. I mean, if you look at the cover, for God's sakes, the cover of this film is Dolph, okay, looking through the scope of a sniper rifle, okay?
Yeah.
There's never... what's interesting is for a guy whose wife and kid were kidnapped and killed, there's never really any urgency on his behalf. He gets one scene at the beginning where he emotes and shows sadness at his wife and daughter's passing, but that's really it. And considering that this should be a revenge story, like I said earlier, which is something that Dolph has done before and is great at, his character and his story, like I said, are really just an afterthought. And it seems like everybody here is just going through the motions. I will say in the end, I think that's the big point I'm going to come back to with the tracker, is I feel like there was some potential here, okay, with the script, okay? Again, they could have just done another standard revenge story. They had a really cool locale, okay? And I'm going to give Serafini some credit. The film actually does, despite being pretty drab and not having the best color palette to it, it does resemble and look like an actual movie. But in the end, they had these opportunities that at the end were kind of squandered.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement. I think it lacked any kind of intrigue, and I think with a film like this, particularly if you're going for a bit more of a thriller rather than just normal action, it needed a little bit more intrigue. I think even something like Cover Up, going back to that, you know, it's not perfect, but I've always found it a little bit underrated in Dolph's CV. And, you know, there are moments of intrigue in that, you know, as he uncovers things, and I think this really kind of lacked any of that. And then, you know, there's no real kind of action payoffs either. I think it's a shame, really, because it's almost foolproof in terms of they shoot a lot of this during the day, so you're in these great Italian-looking locations. So it's always going to look kind of, at least on a basic level, pretty decent. But yeah, I think, like you say, it was maybe a little bit too drab in terms of the grading, and maybe a little bit rushed in terms of the framing. I think it's one of those where if you'd have taken someone like Jesse Johnson, William Kaufman, or even Dolph himself, they could have got a lot more out of this kind of concept.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it. And I think I've echoed that on the show numerous times, is directors like Jesse Johnson, Isaac Florentine, William Kaufman, and even Dolph himself. I mean, these are guys who really know how to make the most of not just the budget, but of shooting time. Okay.
Yeah.
And and that's very evident with all the films that they've done. Okay, so obviously I don't think these films really get high recommends, but what I'd like you to do, Tom, if you could please, and you've kind of in a roundabout way already stated it, but if you had to rank these three films, okay, how would you rank them? Okay, with one being the best or at least the most watchable, all the way down to the worst. I know earlier we kind of joked saying don't bother with all three of them, but in the end, how would you rank this triumvirate?
Yeah, so at number 3, I would be saying Hard Night Falling, quite a clear 3.
That was my number 1. Sorry, no, I'm just joking.
Yeah. I'm a little bit of a toss-up, really, between Accelerate. I think there's probably slightly more highlights in Acceleration than the Tracker. But I think the Tracker, in terms of there was probably a bit more potential. I'm going to put Acceleration at number 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you and I mean, man, that's interesting because you and I have the exact same opinions, which is really kind of cool. I'm exactly with you. I would put Hard Night Fallen at the bottom of the barrel. Again, that one was a tax write-off that was squeezed out of a 1-week shoot. Okay. And so again, I'm not going to put any more thought into that as needed because, again, I don't think the producers really did either. So yeah, that one for me is at the very bottom, and I'm right there with you as well in terms of Acceleration and the Tracker being a toss-up. I will say that the Tracker resembles more of an actual movie. Acceleration just has this very cheap and shabby digital look to it. I mean, you can tell that that what's on display are a lot of like makeshift sets. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the offices in the room, you can tell. I mean, and so I don't think that really works to its to its advantage. However, there are a few fight scenes in Acceleration, and also the use of neon is something that kind of, holds your attention a little bit. So I will put Acceleration above Tracker for those aspects, but in the end, I think Tracker, like I said, in the Tracker is going for that 70s European kind of look and feel, you know what I mean? And so on that end, I will say it resembles more of a completed movie. But yeah, for me, number 1 is Acceleration, number 2 is the Tracker, and then number 3 is Hard Night Falling. Having said all of that, Tom, I don't think, actually, I know I'm not going to be going back to these and revisiting them anytime soon. I do really appreciate, though, man, you really took a bullet for me on this one, so thank you.
I took 3 bullets, I think.
Yeah, 3 bullets. I know. I can only imagine how when I was inquiring, saying, "Hey, would you be willing?" You were thinking, "Wow, okay. I don't get Skin Trade. I don't get Don't Kill It. I don't get Creed 2. But wow, I'm getting 3. Okay, Sean. I'm sorry."
It's a difficult period in his career. I'll give you that. So it wouldn't surprise me if you have to do a few more kind of collections.
Oh yes, this is the second of this is the third combo episode, and I'm gonna have a few more. But in any case, before I let you go, the show is yours at this point. I know, man. Speaking of productions getting turned around fairly quickly. I mean, man, the past few years have been pretty prolific for you. It seems like, as I remember, what's interesting is I remember when we had you on, and we should probably say you've also contributed a number of audio essays for the show for Diamond Dogs, and then you did Don't Kill It as well. But I know when we had you on for The Minion, your screenwriting career was kind of, is it fair to say, it was kind of lifting off, and you were getting a few projects since then. Okay, since we had that conversation, how many total movies have been made based on your scripts?
Oh, I would say, so if the Minion episode was around about 2018, 2019, that was probably around about the start of my kind of feature career, I guess.
Yeah.
It's probably coming up to, I think I've had about 20, 25. It's been ridiculous.
My God.
Since the first one, it just snowballed non-stop.
In 4 years. 4 years.
Yeah,
man.
I mean,
I'm curious. What is? Sorry, but what is the quickest turnaround you've ever done a script? Because my understanding, a lot of times, is producers will go to established screenwriters and say, "Okay, I have a submarine set. I need you to throw together a script over the course of a weekend that has a sea monster and a submarine." I mean, that's a lame example, but is that kind of the approach that a lot of producers have come to you with?
Well, speaking of monsters, sea monsters, I've had a sky monster request. So basically, there was I got notice that there was going to be an airplane set available, and someone needed to have a film written about it, and they wanted a creature feature. So I wrote a film called Sky Monster, which was probably in less than 2 weeks, and then they were filming about 3 or 4 weeks after that. That was a couple of years ago now. I think that's due out this autumn sometime. Yeah, it can be very quick. So I might get notice at the beginning of a month, and they might be shooting at the end of the month. I'm just looking at a project now, which is another one that's going to be set on an airplane. You know, a lot of these things are very minimal in terms of locations. So, yeah, I might be doing a sort of plane hijack film that's looking to shoot next month. Other things can take a lot longer, so there's a longer development time. They can kind of even get stuck in development. I've had quite a few scripts that I've been working on that have just kind of gone as far as sort of funding and then collapsed at that point, which is just one of the frustrating realities of the business. I've had a few close calls on a couple of golf films as well. So, you know, you could be on here slaughtering one of my films at some point.
Oh, sorry. Well, and we should probably also say that you've written a film for Daniel Zarilli, who directed Acceleration, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that was a bit of an odd one because I'd signed on to that film before he was on board, and then a week or so later he contacted me because this was just after I'd written a review for Acceleration. And, you know, as I say, I wrote quite a constructive review. It wasn't like entirely positive, but I could comment on the positive aspects of the film because there were, as we discussed, there were, you know, aspects that I did enjoy. So he quite appreciated that and just sort of started chatting with me. A week after that, he then signs on to the same film that I'm on. So that was just a bit of an odd sort of turnaround, really. Yeah, that was Renegade. So that came out at the end of last year with Danny Trejo, Lee Majors, Michael Pare. That was really the sort of the big jump for me, where I'd been doing like really low budget indie films shot in the UK. Not really with any kind of big names, but then Renegades was like the first one with quite a few names in it. Yeah, so later this year I've also got Cinderella's Revenge coming out. That's the first of 3 films I've been doing with Mark Lester, you know, of Showdown and Little Tokyo fame. I don't know if you interviewed Mark yet?
No, I have not been able to. So maybe by the time we stop recording, you might be willing to lend his contact information. I don't know, Tom. Maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I can. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm sure he'd love to talk about that film. Yeah, so I'm hoping Cinderella's Revenge will come out this year. That's got Natasha Henstridge in it.
Oh, cool.
Which, as a fan of hers in the 90s, was quite pleasing for me. And yeah, right now I've got something filming. So the beginning of the year, I've been so busy. I kind of said to myself that I want to kind of slow down and focus a bit more on producing my own projects as well. So I've got a film called The Baby in the Basket, which is a kind of old school gothic horror. That's shooting basically as we speak. They had their first day of photography yesterday. So yeah, I'm hoping that goes well. Got my fingers and toes and everything crossed that there's no filmmaking disasters. And yeah, we'll be hoping to see that one out late next year or early 2025.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, being a screenwriter, I feel like, a screenwriter is, in some respects, kind of a thankless job. But when you write these films, how often? I mean, are you ever invited to set, or is it pretty much you write the particular film, send it off to the powers that be, and then collect the check, and then you just kind of sit back and wait to see how it turns out? Or, I mean, like for example, with this Natasha Henstridge project, are you going to be able to hang out on set? Is that how it works, or no?
I mean, I probably could have a set visit if I want. I think I've missed that opportunity, sadly, which is a shame. It depends on time, really, because usually by the time someone is shooting one of my films, I'm in the midst of writing the next thing, or another thing after that. Yeah, but normally I hand a script off, and then that's kind of it, and then I wait however long it is and see the final product and hope that they've kind of not butchered it.
Yeah.
But sometimes there could be significant changes, or sometimes there's minimal changes. Yeah, it's been interesting. I think in terms of this, like the commissions, the jobs I'm given, I get kind of given a basic outline, and then I kind of work from that. Sometimes it's like a full treatment. So yeah, I've enjoyed kind of doing other people's ideas, but I think I'm starting to look into kind of producing a bit more and doing the kind of things that I want to do as well. But it's a lot more stress, I can tell you that, in terms of being, I don't envy, Giorgio or anyone like that that's producing themselves, because, some of the realities, it slaps you in the face a bit. So I do have an appreciation that sometimes these things are difficult to kind of get out the best way you can.
Yeah. Well, this is Tom. Thank you again so much. I mean, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. I really do appreciate all of that, and I will, of course, be on the lookout for all of these particular films. Congratulations, by the way. I mean, man, to be 25 films over the course of 4 years is pretty amazing. Yeah. But yeah, again, I really do appreciate this, Tom. This was a ton of fun, and I don't know, like I said, we're kind of getting near the end, but I don't know, maybe if you might be willing to send in your thoughts on other gems such as Forgotten or Altitude, or I'm trying to think what is left. Dead Trigger. We still have coming up. I mean, so and then we also have a few that are still awaiting release. For example, such as Wanted Man, I know is in post-production. Yeah. There's another one, oddly enough, that he was once again starred with Isaac Florentine, called Hellfire. So in any case, yeah, there's still quite a few, but you're always welcome back. I had a ton of fun. Thanks again.
Yeah, I'd love to come back. Yeah, anytime.
All right. To everyone out there who is listening, please feel free to rate and review the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you go to subscribe. We always appreciate the reviews, and we'll see you all next time on I Must Break This Podcast.